Hey guys, welcome back to another video. My name's Karnage, and today we are going to be playing Boom Beach. Perhaps more specifically, we are actually going to be discussing zookas. What we're going to be going through in this video is actually how to group up your zookas, how to land them, how to use smokes, all of that great stuff. Some of it may seem a bit basic and straightforward, like common knowledge, but you'd be surprised how many people don't know all the facts. We are also going to be going through how to flare properly, and what causes these flares to make troops spread out, that sort of thing. We aren't going to be going through how to predict the walking path of every Zooka. That will be discussed in a future video I'm hoping to make. I don't know how far away that video is going to be, but let's jump into this straight away. So the first thing you need to know when you're grouping up Zookas is your smokes. How big are they? How many Zookas can you fit in them? That sort of thing. So let's look at this sniper tower. You can see the grid here. It's exactly 3 grid squares big by 3 grid squares long. I call those little grid squares pixels, just for future reference. So if you hear me say pixels, that's what I'm referring to, each one of those squares. Okay guys, so let's look at this real quick. If I drop a smoke in the middle here, you can see that smoke covers exactly 3 sniper towers. If you remember from what I just said, each sniper tower is 3 squares big. That means that your smoke is exactly 9 pixels in size. So now that we know how big our smoke is, the very first thing we need to know is how many Zookas we can fit in that square. Alright, so now you can see exactly how many Zookas are under this smoke here. The main group is covered by about 2/3 of the smoke, so I'd say about 6 squares, maybe 7 depending on how grouped up they are. Okay guys, so now I'm going to show you an example of bad grouping. Let's look at this. My Zookas have all grouped up here, but now you can see all my Zookas are not under that smoke. I've got some out, they're not grouped up, they're all spread out. And you might be saying, well, that's actually because you didn't flare. Well, you'd actually be surprised to know that you don't need to flare in order to group up your Zookas. An effective flare looks like this. Sorry, an effective grouping looks like this. So let's just take out that building. Let's drop our Zookas. Let's flare near that building. And I'll be explaining why you flare like that. You can see how the Zookas look under the smoke. That's an effective smoke. They're all covered under the smoke quite effectively, and it only covers about 2/3 of the flare, of the actual smoking size, right? It only covers about 2/3 of it. So you might be wondering, well, why did they not group up properly the first time when I did not flare? And that's actually because the building was too far away. What happens when your Zookas get deployed is they all find a target. They all find the nearest possible target and walk to it. So if there's only one building and it's near the beach, or there's a few buildings close to where your deployment flags are, they will all group up there and you won't need a flare. So that's a good thing to note. Okay guys, so now I'm going to show you the effective means of actually deploying your Zookas without using a flare. So I've dropped my smoke and I've dropped my deployment flags, and this building's only about 1 square away from the actual beach. You can see all my Zookas there were under the smoke, and they were all grouped up quite effectively. That is the proper way to deploy Zookas without any kind of flares. Okay, so we just looked at deploying Zookas without needing a flare. What we're going to look at, if we look at this base here now, you can see that there's a mortar on the beach we can group up at. But there's one slight issue. If you remember from the last attack, the building was up the top and the landing crafts were underneath it. That was very ideal because it didn't take the Zookas much time to walk to that building. But because this building's at the end, the last landing craft that actually deploys, that landing craft is going to take a while for my Zookas to get there. And my smoke's going to run out before I can drop the flare and get them walking. So that's an issue. Over a small distance like this base, that smoke cost isn't going to be too expensive, it won't matter too much. But if you're in a task force operation and you're flaring quite over a long distance, that extra smokes is going to cost you, and it's going to cost you a lot. In fact, it might be what the deciding factor in whether you win that attack. So, how do we get around this? How do we deploy in this scenario? Well, there is one way. Well, actually, there's probably a few ways, but the way we're going to look at is the Bedstyle Landing. So how do you do this? Well, the first thing is you need to drop a flare where you want to group up at. And one of the key advantages to doing this way is actually that you can keep them grouped up straight away, and it's super easy to deploy at the end of a beach. So we're going to start off here. We can see that this mortar has range on us. There's rockets up here, they don't have range on us. So we're going to have to time our smokes really well. Okay, so we drop our flare. Now we deploy our landing crafts, and we make sure we touch right on the landing craft we just deployed, like on the corner there, so that there's no gaps between our landing crafts. And as you could see when I was deploying, I was actually placing my deployment flags in such a way that, like, there was no gaps there. They were grouped up super nice. And I timed my boat so that the first Zooka that came off the boat was actually at the front of the line when my Zookas were walking. So that way they all stay in this really tight formation. And you can see that they were all grouped up under that smoke at the end there. None of them got exposed, none of them got targeted, or anything like that. So that's how you do the Bedstyle Landing. You can do it with 2 smokes. Okay guys, so a professional Zooka player, when he does a Bedstyle Landing, can actually do this with 2 smokes and 1 flare. So our target is actually going to be a building. Let's just say this was a really hard operation base, and the building we needed to start with was right here, and there was a heap of rockets on us. This is what we'd do. Okay, so we're dropping 1 smoke, and we're going to drop a flare right there. We're going to start dropping our troops right at the end of that smoke. We're going to drop our next smoke there. Then we're just going to drop our troops. And look at that. They're all nicely under that smoke. They're all grouped up. 1 or 2 of them was exposed at the start there. But that's not really an issue. That was my smoke timing. But you can see how a professional does a Bedstyle Landing without really losing any troops, and keeping everything nicely grouped up, and only using 2 smokes. This might not sound like a big deal, but in the world of operation bases where every smoke counts and every GBE counts, everything helps. So if that means 1 less smoke, that might be the difference between a shock bomb or a critter box at the end when you get there. Okay guys, so now I've shown you the two most common methods, I'm going to be showing you a really rare case where you're in a corner like this. You're going to notice that there's a rocket here, which is quite dangerous. Two smokes covers me. I'm going to flare here. One smoke. Two smokes. Now I'm going to go right in here. And you can see how I smoked, how I kept everything in control. Okay guys, so now we have our next scenario. We want to flare right to the middle of this HQ, and we need to group up our zookas very early on so we got a nice and straight path from wherever we start. So, the methods we've described so far, we can't group them up without a flare because that flamethrower is too far away from the beach to do it. We can't do our Bedstyle Landing because although that will work, we want to group them up so our walking path is straight. We don't want to be grouping up at the end here and then having to go round stuff. So now our next scenario is actually going to be very ideal for this sort of layout, and it's not as effective for when you've got rockets on the beach because you have to drop more smokes, but it is very effective for what I want to do. So you start off by dropping all your landing crafts all at once. You flare up to this rocket launcher and then you drop the smoke. And now you flare right up to wherever the kill spot's going to be. But we're not going to do that. We're only doing this as a tutorial on how to group. So that's how you do that. Your timing has to be very critical on when you drop your smokes. Because if you drop that first smoke too early, what you're going to find is that smoke runs out and then you get killed by everything. Okay guys, now I've went through a lot of points in regards to how to group up your troops on the beach, and I've went through a whole heap of different methods. There is more than that. There's countless, but those are the main ways of doing it. I think a lot of the other ways are just slight variations of it, of the ones I've shown. But now that we've went through that, and there is one more point I'd like to add. The beach style landings and the one I mentioned after it, where I dropped all the landing craft and then I flared near a building, those sort of ones can be used in a variety of situations. A lot of the time you can use either one. But now I'd like to go through points where a few things that would cause your zookas to spread out and where you would lose the grouping of your zookas. There's two ways in general that this can happen. There's a few more than that, but the two main ways. The first one is where you flare. If I drop a flare, and it's, say, a little bit offset, what happens is your zookas, it can force your zookas in certain situations to take a various path, and it will cause them to spread out. This is something that I can't go through in this video, because predicting the path of a Zooka is actually a very big topic. So we're going to have to cover that one in another video. But there is another one that causes a lot of people, especially beginners, to lose the grouping of their Zookas, and it is probably the biggest factor, arguably, that causes them to have like a failed attack. And that is where they flare. Or rather, what they're doing with their flare. Because they're so used to using warriors as their go-to troop to attack, when they want to go to a building, they actually drop the flare on it. So say if I wanted to go to this sniper tower, they do that. And you can see that circle that comes out showing that it's targeted it. What a Zooka does when it naturally does this is actually they form a line. It's roughly about 6 grid squares long. When I say grid squares, I mean those little squares you see when you're building your base and you try to move it around. You see that grid? That's what I mean when I say pixels. But it's roughly 2 sniper towers in width. That's how big the line is. I'll show it on screen right now so you can see. But that's generally like the range of it. So when you do that, every Zooka is now going to walk to its own spot in that line, causing it to spread out. This is a very big problem, obviously. So how do you avoid this? Well, we'll just take out this building. To avoid this, instead, say I wanted to go to this sniper tower, instead of flaring it, what you should be doing is flaring near it, like that. Now they'll form a group, like a circle shape, around this flare, and now they'll walk straight to that point from wherever they are. And that's probably the biggest factor that causes people to fail, as I mentioned. So, this is just little things, but I thought it was very worthwhile to mention because, and if you know how to group up your troops, it doesn't mean much if you make them spread out again and you lose that that grouping. So this is everything I think I can tell you guys about grouping up troops. I really hope this has helped you guys. Definitely drop a comment, like the video if you enjoyed it. If you guys show some support, I'll definitely do a part 2 to my Zooka guides, and in the next video it's going to be explaining the walking path of Zookas. So I'll see you guys in the next one, and I hope you guys have a good day.